between us as IDCC and also our partners. So, and today I would like to introduce Chris G from Shanghai City, and also Edward to, I'm actually having a very interesting and timely discussion about Myanmar and also a philanthropic project in Myanmar. So I'll actually pass it to Chris. Please go ahead, Chris.
Great, thanks, Tat. So my name is Chris G. I am co-founder of Shanghai City, and I'm here to talk about with Edward Choi about smart philanthropy. And smart philanthropy, we're defining pretty broadly just how to do philanthropy smarter, and then also, of course, how to engage with technology and philanthropy. So that's going to be today's topic. We're going to be focusing on blockchain for today. I think that's very much about IDCC and this thing called Decentralized Development Finance Framework, or DDFF. So I'm Chris. I'm actually in San Francisco. It's 2 a.m. for me. And Edward is here. He's actually the founder of Connecting Myanmar, and together we're working on a project we're going to introduce a little bit later to you, but we're going to be talking about, or Edward's going to be talking about some of the philanthropic models he's been working on with Connecting Myanmar, and then we're going to talk about our collaboration together with how to infuse technology into these things to address the latest issues in Myanmar. So without further ado, Edward, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm based in Hong Kong. My name is Edward. I'm from a charity called Connecting Myanmar. So as you can see here, we have quite a lot of young members. Connecting Myanmar actually started back in 2011, started as a student organization coming out from the University of Hong Kong. I was a student at Hong Kong U back then studying political science. And together with some of our friends, we started an organization. The reason why we chose Myanmar is actually a coincidence. As you will see further down these presentations, there's one professor called Professor Ian Holiday in Hong Kong U. He is very passionate about Myanmar, especially in political science. And he, every summer, who essentially organized some Hong Kong U students to Myanmar to teach. I happen to be one of them. I was teaching in refugee schools on the Thai-Myanmar border for 3 months. That was my first summer holiday. And after that experience, we've decided to set up this organization to kind of broaden our scope. So we started organizing different university students from Hong Kong to go to Myanmar every year. But instead of just teaching English, we try to provide a platform for them to contribute their skills and knowledge. So started from 2011, we have over 400 volunteers coming from Hong Kong to Myanmar to volunteer. And we have made many friendship and connections. So that's the birth of Connecting Myanmar. Slide, please. So the focus for our organization started with knowledge transfer. We know that we are in a very privileged position, studying in Hong Kong, and many students, they study different subjects. So for example, we have law students coming from Hong Kong U, we have some medical students as well. So Connecting Myanmar is essentially a platform to bridge that knowledge gap so that we can facilitate knowledge transfer between Hong Kong students and also Myanmar students. So our program, we mainly have 3 programs. The first one is what we call a street law program. And you can see some of the Hong Kong volunteers here. They started as a uni students volunteer, but some of them have went on to, for example, one of the Hong Kong girl here, she's actually working in the World Food Program in Myanmar right now, dealing with the ongoing crisis. So many of them have went on to find passions in humanitarian missions and career as well. Slide, please. So the first program that we have is what we call a street law program. It's a 1-month-long program that we organize every summer pre-COVID. The idea is to basically organize the Hong Kong uni students, mainly law students, to Myanmar and then attach them to different organizations. It can be NGO, or as you can see here, a workers' association on the Thai-Myanmar border, and then to facilitate a 1-month-long legal workshops. Those legal workshops will not necessarily touch on the very specific Myanmar law or Hong Kong law, but more about the general universal ideas behind the law. So for example, equality, racial, no matter in racial equality or in other aspects as well. As many of you might probably know, racial conflict is a very serious problem in Myanmar. Before COVID, before the coup, now they have even more problems now. But racial equality and religious equality is one of the main issue in Myanmar back then. So we try to be a platform to provide this kind of room and environment for them to kind of talk about these things and discuss these kind of topics as well. Slide, please. The other program that we have is actually a news literacy program. We work with the journalism school in Hong Kong U. This is a 3-month-long program. We do this on the Thai-Myanmar border by partnering with a refugee news agency called Young Generation Note. And the idea is to recruit some journalism students from Hong Kong and then pair them up with some high school graduates on the Thai-Myanmar border to facilitate a journalism workshops. So from that 3-month-long workshop, we hope to help the students to better understand what kind of information is trustworthy, what kind of information is just hearsay or can be potentially fake information. The thing is, Myanmar has gone through a very rapid transition from a very traditional country to everyone holding a smartphone. So one of the issues that we have encountered is the spread of fake information, especially in relation to religious conflict in the country. So that's why we have organized these kind of workshops to help the students to kind of go through and determine what sort of information can be trusted. How can you verify the news source from a particular article or the purpose of a particular press image, for example, in the case shown here. And the good thing about that is many of these students have gone on to become a mini writer, to talk about stories from their own communities. Many of them, they are refugees/migrants in their community, and they are not necessarily the people who are well served by the traditional media. They are technically in Thailand, but they are Myanmar people. So they don't necessarily find the traditional Thai media or Myanmar media to be very suitable to their circumstances. So we basically give them the tool to become the writer to tell the stories from their community. Slide, please. So what I have just shared was the beginning of Connecting Myanmar while we were still at uni as a students. As we graduated and gone on to different career, I happened to be working in the art industry. I was an art trader in a commercial gallery. And one fascinating thing that I encounter is how easy it is for people to buy a sculpture that worth millions of dollars, and how difficult it is to convince someone to fund a school with 400 students for 1/10 of that price. Obviously, the social impact of that school will largely outweigh what you can get from that sculpture, from that shiny sculpture. So something that I've been trying to do is to basically bridge that two world, the very prestige art world with the very much needed development world. So what we do is we work with some leading artists from Myanmar. For example, the one that you can see here, his name is Omyat. He's one of the leading Myanmar artists born in 1948. His works has been collected by the Guggenheim Museum in New York and also in the UBS collection, the largest corporate arts collection in the world. It's a very leading artist. And we organize this kind of top-notch art charity exhibition in Hong Kong, catering the very well-off people, supporters, And then all the profit from that charity show will be donated to our charity to fund Myanmar students to go to university. So you can actually see the small painting on the right-hand side, the mother and child painting. So just for your information, just for context, we're selling these small paintings, original artworks for 40,000 Hong Kong dollar each. And funding a Myanmar student to go through a 4-year university program in Thailand will cost about 30K. So for each of these small painting that we sell, we can send one student to go to a university for a 4-year program. So that's what we've been doing for the past 4 years. And right now we have 14 students, Myanmar students studying in Thai university right now, doing subjects ranging from social science to nursing to journalism. And the kind of students that we chose are usually the ones, the future leaders at a very rural community level. So they're not necessarily the elite students from Yangon, from major cities like Yangon, with a very prestige CV, but they're the ones who want to go back to their community to help out the other people once they graduate from uni, once they have the means. So we've decided to fund these kind of students and continue to partner with them upon their graduation to incubate and support their projects to benefit more people in their community. Slide, please. Right, Ubiquity. So this will be the main focus. Chris, is that your slide?
Yep,
cool.
Great. Okay, so thank you so much, Edward. So we'd like to introduce our collaboration together, which actually we are calling Ubiquity, which is about open source universal basic income. This is kind of where the intersection of academic research, activism, and open source technology development come together to try to solve this problem of universal basic income. And really, when we came together, I believe this was before the entire political meltdown in Myanmar. And then it was already complicated to try to solve it before that, and now 10 times more complicated to solve it now that all these things, plus COVID, et cetera. We're going to talk about that in a second. But this is a collaboration between, as Edward mentioned, Professor Ian Holliday. He is actually the one that's going to be essentially supporting this entire endeavor, working with Connecting Myanmar and Chiang City to do technology development. We have partners. We have the BMW Foundation that is actually so kind enough to help us do things like systems engineering design. They may help us with fundraising. They may help us with a lot of things, but they would like to give their full support behind Ubiquity. Of course, IDCC, thank you very much for hosting us today. We will and I'll be explaining how the technology stack works, but we'll most likely be using everything that IDCC has been generating up till today. And of course, that's built on top of ICSO, which is the Internet of Impact. So just to share with you guys a website that no one else in the world has seen yet, because we just launched it today, our Ubiquity website. And I'll explain what it is. Essentially, it's building the path towards universal basic income through advocacy, research, and technology. And what this means is that universal basic income actually doesn't really exist anywhere in the world very successfully. And the places where it does exist, it's not documented and not researched. So our mission is really to find out how can this work, and can we create a compelling path for either governments or for other entities or for the blockchain industry to decentralize it so that it can be fully supported. Our mission is actually to bring universal stability, security, and hope. And the reason why is because this is really about, the poorest of the poor. This is about people that are struggling daily to find, their livelihood, to survive, just to sustain. And we would like to make sure that whatever it is that we deliver is going to be able to satisfy those conditions. Again, we are a nonprofit foundation that's all about open source, right? So open source, universal basic income. We are producing research for this. We will be publishing a white paper soon. which you can find at this website, about all of our secondary research right now, which is all our desk research, trying to understand how does technology actually serve these kinds of issues? How do these universal basic incomes versus conditional cash transfer programs actually work, and what are the pluses and minuses of those kinds of things? And then, of course, the actual technology that we'll be developing for this will be open source as well, that we'll be making available so that it can be scalable to other countries that can, that can start using this. This is actually the product of, we just started this about 6 weeks ago. So, there's not so much IP that we've generated so far, but this is our direction. This is what we've come up with so far. Our pilot is going to be in Myanmar. Like we mentioned, there's connecting Myanmar is definitely the impetus of why we are doing this in Myanmar, but we also have ambitions for this nonprofit called Ubiquity to actually go beyond Myanmar. But Myanmar is where we will start. And there's a lot of really unique things that we have to overcome right now. I think Edward's going to share some of these very, very unique kinds of problems in the next slide. So let me just, so maybe Edward, you can start talking about what is it that we're actually facing in Myanmar, even just to start.
Right. Well, to go back a little bit, Myanmar has been a dictator country for a very long time. It opens up very recently, actually, in around 2013, 2014. So in a way, the recent coup happened on the 1st of February is kind of going back to the norm. It coupled with the impact of COVID-19. So the situation in Myanmar is definitely very tough. Since the coup happened on the 1st of February this year, according to some official figure, more than 800 protesters have been killed. The real number will probably be much higher than that. If you look at the poverty situation in Myanmar before the coup in 1st of Feb this year, you're looking at roughly around 24% of the population in poverty, which is earning less than $1 per day. After the coup, one of the estimates provided by UNDP is saying that by the end of 2021, almost half of the population in Myanmar will fall under that poverty line, $1 a day. So it's jumping from 24% before the coup to around 48% after the coup. So that has some very dramatic, devastating impacts on the population, especially on the younger generation as well. The other thing that we are facing right now is the collapsing of the banking system in Myanmar. So for many of you who might have seen it on newspaper, it's almost impossible for people to get their cash right now from any Myanmar banks. So for context, almost all of the ATMs in Myanmar has stopped resupplying cash for the people. And also, let's say if you have a bank account in Myanmar and if you want to withdraw from your bank account, right now you will need to book an appointment. Usually it would take you 3 months before you can actually go to the bank to withdraw your money. And the cap right now is around 10,000 Hong Kong dollar per transaction. So you can only get 10,000 Hong Kong dollar for every 3 months if you're lucky. Not to mention that there's also a lot of physical risk for people that are going out on the street, even just to go to your banks to get cash right now. So all these have caused quite a lot of operational challenges, especially since our program is essentially a cash transfer program. Yeah, slide please. To be more specific, the problem that we're trying to deal with is the educational dropout problem. For many of the children in the country, many of them, they have stopped going to school since the beginning of COVID from last year. Many of the schools in the countries are still closed. Usually May would be the beginning of the school year. But because of the coup, many of the parents, many of the teachers, they're actually trying to keep the school closed. There's also something called the CDM, civil disobedience movement in Myanmar. So basically the protesters are asking all the civil servants, including all the public school teachers, to stop going to work. And as a result, almost all of the children right now are out of school for already more than 1 year. And we will go into the timeline of this program in a little bit, but we aim to launch this program by the beginning of the school year next year. So by the time we launch this program, many of these children will be out of school for 2 years already. So the main challenge is how do we get them back to school? Because as we know, once these children are out of school, especially with the poverty situation that I just mentioned, it's very tempting for the parents to ask their kids, especially at the right age, anyone above 12 years old, to go to work instead of going back to school. Many of the children have also lots of difficulties in re-entering the education system as well. So basically this program is trying to facilitate that re-entry to the education program. Right now we are at the stage that we are still looking at the reason of the dropout besides financial reasons. Of course, some parents might want their kids to go to work to earn additional income to support their family, but we know that that's not all of the reasons. For example, some parents might not even be fully understand of the value coming out from that education investment. So that's also requires some additional intervention to address that as well. So right now we are looking into the problem and the underlying reason of that education dropout right now. So we're exploring a number of potential solutions. Should we just simply give out cash transfer to give our small monthly subsidy to the parents to encourage them to keep their children at school? Especially we're looking at children who are finishing middle school and entering high school, because usually historically we have seen the highest level of dropout rate in that transition. And also we are exploring whether we should set up some boot camp to facilitate kids who have been out of school for as long as 2 years to better re-engage with the school system and with the curriculum. And what sort of other support service we can provide to the parents and also to provide to the students and teachers to facilitate that re-entry. And ultimately, how can we provide a better pathway for them to enhance their social mobility? All right, thanks, Chris.
Okay.
I'll let you take over.
Yep. So sorry, I'm working in between two screens. Right. So I'm going to talk about the actual program design, and this is a starting point for us. This is the essentially the seed of where we're starting, and then we have to solve how to actually deploy this. So the design of the program. First, we were looking at universal basic income versus conditional cash transfer. And universal basic, and I'll just define those really quickly. Universal basic income means it doesn't matter who you are, you have access to getting this kind of income. And conditional cash transfer, as the name says, means that there's some conditions towards receiving that kind of cash. What we are doing is actually a conditional cash transfer, but what we're trying to do is build an argument towards universal basic income, or what is called universal ultra basic income. That's actually the state where it is right now, which is basically, this isn't actually enough money for you to survive, but it'll be more money to help you move forward. And so, what we call it, it's let's not worry about that just yet. But essentially, the condition is any household with children of age to attend between the grades of 5 and 6. And that is the nature of the pilot program. The nature of Ubiquity is actually to try to keep expanding and expanding the inclusivity of what these kinds of conditional cash transfer programs are until it's completely inclusive of everybody. And we'll get into some of those kinds of problems that we have to face in the future about that later. So about this particular program, you know, the 5th and 6th grade is actually where we see the highest dropout rate is. For whatever reason that might be, it's a unique period in Myanmar where children are making it all the way up to about 4th and 5th grade, and then for whatever kinds of economic reasons, they need to start working. The children just can't go to school anymore. You know, and it's a very high transition period for the parents, right, at this time. And we believe that, you know, as a universal basic income program, of course, we could just give cash to any kind of target community. There are many programs like this in the world. We actually worked with one in Brazil. But we believe that education is actually the key towards solving intergenerational poverty, right? So not just giving cash so that you can get by, but also making sure that, you know, the more education you have, the more actual financial and social returns you'll have, not just for that child, but also for the family and for the community as well. There is not so much research to show that universal basic income can solve these problems, but there is a lot of research showing that education actually has an exponential return, especially for early education versus later education, like adult education. And it's much more exponential. Like, for instance, in adult education, you pretty much get like a 1-to-1 return. But in early childhood development, early childhood education, you get something like a 1-to-10 return for like the GDP of the country, of the community, of that family, of the individual. So it's just a very exponential thing. So that's why we're targeting it. Some other conditions are, if the child drops out of school, but the family doesn't move, we will continue to pay them benefits. And the reason why is because there may be several kinds of reasons that we cannot plan for, that the parents certainly cannot plan for, which will not allow them to have their child continue through school, whatever kinds of hardships or unique conditions those are. But we believe, and there's actually a lot of research that we found as part of our secondary research, showing that if you keep paying these benefits to those families, then there's actually a chance that the child may actually return back to school, if not immediately, then at least in subsequent years. And also that it has a net effect within the community that actually helps. You know, the children are going to have to, you know, have some kind of support somehow anyway. And so it's going to have a net effect on their vitality. And for the sake of this pilot, if the household actually moves out of the area, out of the cohort, then we will release their contract, and then we may actually retarget that money into somebody else within that community. And the reason why is we believe that this has to work within communities, because it's about everyone connecting together and floating up together, or else, you know, we just don't have sufficient funds to like pay for all of Myanmar. And we also need to study the effects, which I will go on to the next slide. Okay. Actually, before I go on to the next slide, which is about technology, I do want to mention something about the program design. It's actually designed to be an RCT, a random control trial study. And it's going to be a long-term project. It's going to be several years. We will start off, you know, with just a few communities until we pilot it correctly or adequately, and then we'll scale it into a full-blown RCT study. And that means that it'll be a totally random sample of communities, so that we can actually produce results that are usable towards academics, towards you know, legislators, towards activists, towards technologists like ourselves, that can towards philanthropists that can actually help make these things work. But we first have to have the right amount of data and analysis to show what are the overall effects of the program. So at Shanghai City, our role is actually to kind of plan out the entire digital pathway for this program. So I'm going to talk about the things that we need to consider. In all of our projects, we always consider last mile data readiness. And what that means is, we have all this high tech, information that passes through our phones, but not everybody can use it. Not everybody can get access to it. And certainly not everyone is willing to share their information. And so the first thing that we need to consider are these things like people's access to technology, people's access to the programs, people's access in general. And then second is about their abilities. We measure their data literacy, and data literacy, if I can just go through all the different types of literacy, there's regular reading, writing literacy, right? There is digital literacy, which is your ability to use digital tools. And then there's data literacy, which is the ability for you to extract value from data and data systems, data-driven processes. And that's essentially what we want to bring. That's also something that we're looking to improve to help bridge the data divide. And the third thing is about willingness. And willingness has to do with, people at the last mile may not be so trustful of programs that come from a different country or programs that come from their own government. And they may not be willing to share their information. They may not be willing to participate in these things that will reveal the nature of maybe some gray market or black market activities that they engage in to survive. So these are the three kinds of things that right off the bat, we have to be very sensitive to and design for. And then embed this into the actual software execution, design and execution, and then also in the program execution. So today, there's a lot of different kinds of technologies that are going to be used in this or that we can use, but I do want to just pay attention to blockchain because I wanted to make that the focus for today. So the primary uses for blockchain for these kinds of social development projects are basically, there's three different kinds of uses. One is about fundraising, right? And you can fundraise, there's a lot of different fundraising platforms. In fact, it doesn't even have to be blockchain. In fact, even better if it's not blockchain. You could just run a GoFundMe page there, but also with, for instance, Ed's art project, you could run an NFT campaign, a non-fungible token campaign. I think you guys have probably seen that in the news. If you haven't seen the news, it's basically a way to put digital collectibles like artwork or things like, titleship to deeds, to things that you own that are very specific on blockchain. And in this meeting, we're not going to talk about what is blockchain, but just know that it is a technology that helps store data immutably and so that people cannot hack it. And that is why things like Bitcoin exist, where you can put something as valuable as a store of money into data. So fundraising was one aspect that we're looking at. And this is actually, when we publish the white paper, you'll see that we're actually looking at, obviously more than blockchain, but we're looking at all these different ways of how blockchain can be used for conditional cash transfer and universal basic income. For instance, people are using blockchain to create their own universal basic income, but not backed by money, just backed by however Bitcoin works, which is somebody mines a coin, they mine a block, right? And then money pops out of it, or Bitcoin pops out of it, and a percentage of that goes to the miner, a percentage of it goes to that Bitcoin or whatever it is, and then a percentage goes to the universal basic income. And that only works if you really believe in that particular token. That only works if you believe in that particular cryptocurrency. Bitcoin, everyone seems to believe in it because it was the first one. Great. There are some that are like the UBI of Bitcoin, but no one's backing it yet because no one cares about it yet. So So we are actually, you'll see if you ever read our white paper, you'll see that we're mostly concerned about actual cash transfer mechanisms or mechanisms that actually hold real tangible values that can be used on the ground, which is about the next point, which is about fund transfers. So fund transfer is really, how do we transfer funds? How do we get money across the border? How do we get money directly to the beneficiary? There are a lot of programs out there that actually, they give them a debit card. This debit card actually allows them to go to a store and then they can buy things at the store. But the catch is that, and I think I'm actually going to go through this in the next slide, but the catch is that it's hard for people to cash out into real money. They can get goods and services, but they can't get money. And the point of universal basic income is to actually give them money, because we, as program designers, we can't be so prescriptive about what we think they need. We don't know what they need. We can guess what they need, but the intelligence of what's happening on the ground, they will know what to do with that money. And the last thing that we're looking at blockchain for, and technology in general, is about data management. And data management is really important for social development and social finance, which is really about reporting what kind of impacts are happening on the ground, or even about that these things happened so that somebody can get their tax break if, say, it's a charitable donation, etc. So we'll be looking at data management systems. And lastly is about, the third consideration is about basic requirements for social development. And really it's that, we are collecting data on people, whether they know it or not, whether they agree or not. And we have to protect that. We have to protect people that don't even know that they're vulnerable. Like for instance, the Facebook and Rohingya, right? That created a lot of terrible things. And so we want to protect against these kinds of problems through identity privacy, data self-sovereignty, which means that through blockchain, we can actually give the ownership of the data that's collected, the ownership to the actual people that produce the data, data protection, and data security. And lastly is about accountability and anti-corruption. Accountability is basically saying, okay, Connecting Myanmar is going to do something, and we just need to have a view into what they're doing so that we can, have monitoring evaluation, make sure they're not doing anything wrong, or that we can help them do things better. And then of course, anti-corruption. And that's because there is a transference of money. We have to follow all the anti-corruption laws, but there's also special protocols that you have to follow because of blockchain, because it's new. Okay. So with that said, I want to walk through what is kind of the anatomy of blockchain, right? Essentially, or how we use it, how blockchain is being used in social development projects. And essentially, it comes down to, like what we're talking about, having some kind of identity, giving a digital identity that associated with that, you can put some kind of digital value transfer. And because on blockchain, you can actually store a lot of different types of information. You can store what's called on-chain, which means that it's publicly available data that everyone can see. You can store off-chain, where nobody can see it, but it's there. And you have to have special permissions to see it. But essentially, it can store your identity credentials, any kind of tokenized assets. It can be your Bitcoins, it can be the deed to your house, it can be a lot of things. And it can help you manage your assets, which are those digital assets. It can actually put your skills and your abilities on, right? So basically like your resume, like LinkedIn or something like that. But this is very important, especially for people that are, they don't have passports, but they need to be able to, if they're refugees, if they're fleeing their country, and they're being sorted into a different country, it's important to be able to say, yeah, in my past life, I was a doctor, and here are the credentials showing that I was a doctor. Or where I come from, I know how to drive, I know how to fix cars, I know how to do all these things, and it's very important that these are validatable. And lastly is about claiming needs. And claiming needs is very important because essentially when we're doing social development, we need to be able to map out what kind of needs an area has. Or people, or whatever it might be. So these are all things that you can gather just from something like a smartphone. It can even just be a, not a smartphone, just a feature phone, right? Or just a handset. But we're not going to talk about how that works today. And of course, on top of that, that we're like with our partner IXO or IXO, there's all kinds of different project management for social development and for social finance. I'm not going to go into the details of that. Again, today is really about the Decentralized Development Finance Framework, and it's or DDFF. This is something that IDCC is piloting or is initiated. It's their initiative. This is how the framework works. And it's decentralized, which just means it's on blockchain. Okay, on the left side, you have social DeFi models, and DeFi essentially stands for decentralized finance, which just means that instead of having a bank that manages everything, you just have unhackable, programmable data systems that manage these things for you. And so there's all different kinds of DeFi out there. You probably have heard about this in the news lately because DeFi is, I don't know, or maybe you haven't. But there's all different kinds of DeFi that actually are starting to be deployed in social development and social finance. Anything that can help people coordinate without there being a trusted institution like a government or a bank or a lawyer. And so everything is just governed by math and by people essentially working in consensus with each other. So that's DeFi. What we're looking at today is smart philanthropy, or direct cash transfer. And so I'll show you how that works. So essentially there's all these DeFi models, and what that means is that there's something that's coded and it's on the blockchain. It's being on something called a smart contract that runs the project or runs whatever conditions that you want. And what that does is it actually helps to power different kinds of social development verticals. So it might be something about data management like IDCC. It might be something about microfinance, about cooperative farming, about education. And it's all managed by essentially your phone or your desktop or whatever it is, whatever digital device. And also blockchain makes it easy for users to participate. They can participate financially, they can participate by voting, they can participate by saying, I have this particular need and I'm in this region, maybe that's going to help you to deploy funds in this area. So there's a lot of ways that people can actually participate, and blockchain is very unique in that it can actually hold votes that are not gameable or hackable. And the next layer is about the technology layer. And so essentially there has to be something that helps design all these different DeFis. There is the blockchain itself, which actually appends all the information to it. And then also about impact management. And that's essentially what IXO and IDCC are doing to help launch what is going to be what we think is like the next kind of decentralized social development project, which is what we're helping Connecting Myanmar to do with this project. Essentially, this is what it's going to look like with all the stakeholders that we've talked about so far. So what this looks like is, direct cash transfer is going to be for universal basic income, for education. We have our charitable donor, which is Ian, and the beneficiary recipients are going to be children or families, households, as it were. Shanghai City is helping to design what all of the different mechanisms are. IDCC is helping with impact data management, and it's all run on the IXO blockchain platform so that Connecting Myanmar can then launch whatever kinds of creative social development projects that they need and bring the financing in that's all trackable. So essentially, like, this is the framework, but now my job at Shanghai City is actually to design what is the right kind of direct transfer mechanism. And in blockchain, there's actually a whole bunch of different kinds of mechanisms. Here are a few of them. This is not extensive by any means, but essentially you can use it for cash transfer, which we were talking about before. I'm sorry. So cash transfer is actually a centralized technology. It's not blockchain. But it requires massive trust. And in Myanmar right now, all the trusted systems are broken. The banks are broken, the government's broken, rule of law is broken. So it's actually very difficult to use this. It's very hard even just to get cash across the border. And I think Edward actually has some stories to share about that, about some schemes about how people are trying to get cash across the border. The second thing is about cryptocurrency. So cryptocurrency is cool. You could send people Bitcoins, but what are they going to do with it, right? If no one can accept it as payment, but maybe some people can. Let's just say in the cities they can, but what about the rest of the country that's not in cities? But what it does is it helps to overcome the state monetary problem, right? So if their currency is crashing, then if you're sending money in, even though Bitcoin has this crazy volatility, there are other tokens like in like stable coins essentially that hold their value, or they're designed to hold their value. And then it also helps to go around this problem for Forex, or foreign exchange, right? So essentially, which is about the volatility between money markets. And like if I give you $1 million today, and then I buy $1 million worth of whatever your local money is, but then the next day it goes down to like $100,000, then I've kind of put myself at exposed myself to a big risk based on that volatility. So cryptocurrency can help overcome these things, but the problem with it is that growth coins like Bitcoin and Ethereum, all these coins that, you know, their values can go up and down. The volatility is crazy. I mean, you know that Bitcoin just crashed by untold amounts of money, and a lot of people lost a lot of money. And it's very difficult to cash out in developing countries. Stable coins like USDT, DAI, all these kinds. It's basically a representation of money, saying it's worth what they're usually pegged to the US dollar. It's just worth $1. But the problem is that that's also hard to cash out. And then also what it does is it creates a limited amount of liquidity, because people can't really pass it around if not everyone's using the same system. And especially for our pilot may not be so ideal, but we're still looking into it. There's something called M4P vouchers. And this is what I was mentioning before. M4P stands for Market for Poverty. And essentially what it's saying is, hey, there's a bunch of vendors. Maybe we have a drugstore, we have like school supplies, we have this, that, the other, right? Maybe some doctors. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna either pre-buy supplies and I'm gonna give it to you. And then we're gonna hand out all these tokens. We're going to hand out these tokens. They can be pieces of paper. They can be digital certificates. It doesn't really matter. But what they're going to do is they're going to come into your store. They're going to hand you this token that has some kind of set cash value. And you're just going to give it to them. And you're going to hang on to that token. And then you're going to redeem it later. And I will give you that cash, right? And this is actually something that you can do analog. You can do it digitally. You can do it centralized. But there are a lot of blockchain projects out there that are actually doing this. Now, this is a really great way to get people products and services, but again, it's hard to provide them liquidity that they need for all the things that we can't plan. And then also, what happens in the design of these projects is usually all of these vouchers, they can only be cashed out by just one vendor, which is like a super vendor. Or just a few. And what that actually does is that it starts to concentrate wealth to that vendor. And then it creates inequality, right? It creates systematic inequality within that microeconomy. And that's actually a pretty bad thing to happen. So we want to find a way where that doesn't happen. But of course, we're exploring these kinds of things. The last one I want to go through is community currency. And then I'm going to go into more details about two of these if we have time. I think we have like 30 minutes left. So I'm going to try and leave some time for discussion. But essentially, there's cash vouchers, right? So essentially, we can send everybody basically like promissory notes, like digital promissory notes saying this is actually worth $1, but I just can't get you that $1 yet. But it's in another bank account. I'll give it to you later. But you guys start trading these around, and then later you can cash these out at a certain amount of time. There's also what's called futures, like, and so it's basically like, for instance, let's just say I own a land and I can grow corn. These future tokens can be minted to me because I know I will have a yield of approximately this much money, of this much corn or whatever it might be. And so I'm good to back this. And essentially when I sell my corn, all of my tokens that I've been giving you, well, you can cash those back in, right, for real cash. And lastly is about what's called community inclusion currencies. This is a very successful project in Africa being used by the Red Cross, and it's actually a fractional reserve on blockchain. If you don't know what a fractional reserve is, it essentially looks like this. So essentially the Red Cross comes in, they give $1 million. Well, let's just say the Red Cross comes in, they give $1,000 to this bank. So let's say the first depositor is the Red Cross. They're putting $1,000 into this bank. What that bank does is then it says, hey, you know, we're going to reserve $100 worth of that, and we're going to take $900 and we're going to make a loan, and we're going to make this loan to this other guy who's going to spend it, and then that guy that takes that that earns that money, he's going to put it in the bank, and then the bank's going to be like, oh, you know what, we're going to take 10% of that, put that in our reserve, and then we're going to loan out $810, and so on and so forth. And this just keeps going and going and going. The fractional reserve that is set in Africa by grassroots economics for the community inclusion currencies is 25%. So essentially it quadruples the amount of money. So the Red Cross comes in, they hand out $1 million, and that $1 million turns into $4 million worth of value that's circulating within the community. And this is all managed by blockchain. So this is a really amazing thing. But again, like, this is great where you have open access to the community. You can, you know, like where the situation like in Myanmar, where it's very closed down right now, may not work so well. But again, we're going to explore to see, you know, is this something that we can use, or is this something that we can use later? Because this is something that may not be so much about, well, I'll explain later, which is about getting yourself out of a very unstable situation, but this is more about trying to find upward mobility and increasing liquidity. As you know, liquidity is going to be a very big problem, as what Edward mentioned, because the ATMs are all shut down. No one can even get cash, which means soon no one's going to be able to pay each other because everyone's going to be afraid of spending their money. And furthermore, this is actually a system for how, this is something that we're launching in Hong Kong, of essentially how social services can be tokenized. They're paid for by the government or by somebody. So essentially, I won't go through the top half of this, which is about time banks and lending libraries, but the bottom half is about social services. There's some kind of identification that people need help. That's validated by somebody that's an expert that says, oh yes, you deserve this help. They are given tokens. They can choose a service provider where they can spend these tokens. They spend those tokens. Then that service provider goes in and they says, hey, somebody bought my services, and then they get cashed out by whoever is paying for that, right? So this is something, I just wanted to go through these two kinds of cases. Zooming out a little bit, so not just looking at the pilot, but actually looking at the whole spectrum of what Ubiquity is about, we need to incrementally grow our argument towards the adoption of universal basic income. And so this is actually our trajectory. These, you know, some of these are very real milestones and some of these are imaginary milestones. And I'll explain how that works. But essentially, on the very far left is where we are now today. We're just starting this, or like 6 weeks ago. On the very far right is 10 years from now, or 10 years from next year, rather, 11 years from now, which is when, you know, this is an imaginary time period, but this is essentially the length of our program, where we hope to have collected enough data and real world experience to be able to say, hey, this government should take on this universal basic income, or total decentralization, which is like, you know, that a blockchain solution can actually do this. And it's decentralized, meaning that all these people in the world can actually contribute to this fund to help people pay for their daily lives. But the logic of how we have this set up is essentially, you see at the top, Ubiquity is funding these first 2 milestones. The first milestone is this coming December. December is when we're going to have what we call tier 0, or the prototype. The prototype is going to be just testing to see if we can get money in, if we can get people to start taking money using different types of very basic technologies, and just see what it's about and wetting our feet. And this is not going to be part of the RCT study. This is actually going to be with friends, nonprofits, people that are within our partner family that know us, we trust them, they trust us. They'll help us to improve the program. They'll help us to improve the software. They'll help us to improve the entire workflow of cash transfer. And then the school year actually starts. We'll be doing in the following year, and we'll be doing a baseline study for what's tier 1, which is the RCT pilot start. The actual school term doesn't start until June, but for the sake, I'm just saying it's in March. And that'll be truly random. So we'll have, we'll have some areas selected, but we're going to have an RCT process in place where it's not going to be our friends. It's not, and we hopefully will have tested out all the kinks and the quirks beforehand so that it can run smoothly. But of course, it'll be an evolving thing. And how this, how this chart works is on the y-axis is about the diversity of people served, or the kind of the inclusion coefficient. And on the bottom is about the program phases over time. And so essentially what we're saying is we're trying to make this this cash transfer program more and more inclusive over time. So whatever that might be, and this is something that we have to explore more. But like, let's just say that we in the next tier we include households that are based on what we're saying are consensus metrics, which is basically saying that instead of us deciding on who should be part of this, maybe we should have the communities actually start weighing in on who should start receiving these things, right? And there's all different kinds of game theories that we can create to actually help communities to identify these kinds of people, or to create the metrics that can then sift people in or out. And then tier 3 is about, maybe there can be more and more inclusion. And with each one of these, we hope there's like a different kind of fundraising strategy, all the way up until it gets to like CSR, corporate social responsibility, or and getting public-private partnership contracts with the government, basically approaching the government saying, hey, we have corporates that have a good amount of money. They understand how to work with these communities. They are helping with your GDP. They're helping all these things. Can we create these public-private partnerships with the government so that the government can start, taking baby steps, and we all hold our hands together, put training wheels on them to get you to adopt a UBI program or a cash transfer program, whichever. And you can see that our funding strategy is basically, we're starting by funding this ourselves, but in the next tier, we want to do a fund matching program. The BMW Foundation is going to help us to do fundraising efforts for this, and hopefully will help to broker all of their CSR networks and also philanthropy networks to help us actually get monies for the development of each iterative stage across the program. Let's see, what time is it? If I want to go into this, this is actually the considerations about, maybe I'll go into the quick logic of it, or maybe there's actually too much information. You can read about this in our white paper later, but essentially, like, okay, I'll go into a little. Essentially, what you're looking at is this this 45-degree line is what people get paid, right? Let's just say that you get paid your income. And on the y-axis, you have your post-tax income. And on the x-axis, you have your pre-tax income. And the connection of these two, so your post-tax, right, it's going to make it dip. So if you didn't have any taxes, basically you would just have this 45-degree line and you wouldn't pay any taxes. But because you pay taxes, the further along you go, the more tax you're going to pay. Now, the way that UBI works is it basically gives a head start to people down on the lower brackets. But there is a kind of transitionary point past which there is not depreciating returns, but a lessening of returns, right? After a while. So if you're paying a lot of tax, like if you're very rich and you don't receive UBI, actually the amount of taxes that you paid doesn't even cover the UBI that you're being given. So there's you know, so this is actually something that is hard to pass legislatively because of this point. The way, and this is in developed countries. In developing countries, it's more like this. There's like a whole gray area here, a gray market where people just, they don't even get taxed because they're not reporting their income. And so a UBI like that would be more linear up until a certain point, past which people actually start paying taxes. And what it does is it shifts, you know, the break-even point of where people are willing to pay for taxes. And so you can see there's this huge asymmetry of, you know, the rich paying for everybody here. And so this is going to take some solving. And the third thing is on this, the third consideration that we were considering is essentially, how much do we make this conditional cash transfer and targeted versus universal basic income? And so essentially, you know, the arguments here that you have to look at in policy. So in this chart, essentially, you have people that are correctly included and people that are correctly excluded. And then you have people that are incorrectly included and incorrectly excluded. And and from a political standpoint, essentially, more liberal politicians, voters, whatever, economists are more concerned with the exclusion error to make sure that the very needy actually are included. But then the more conservative, fiscally conservative per se, are more worried about the people that are included accidentally. So because they don't want to be wasting their money, they don't want to be giving, you know, people a free ride that don't deserve it, etc. And so these are the kinds of things that we actually have to model. And so I won't go into the details of this, but these are very real conversations that we have to have when we are trying to approach this last little bit of this curve, trying to get taxpayers or trying to get some kind of model to actually support this. Okay, so stepping out even further is that this entire pilot, this entire program for universal basic income is really about helping the bottom tier to escape instability and to get them to be able to maintain personal stability and security. And so there's this dashed line. So this is actually what universal basic income and cash transfer is all about. It's just getting you from being in a bad situation into a livable situation. The work that we've been doing with Shanghai City, IDCC, and DDFF is actually, I have to say that Ubiquity is our first attempt at actually really trying to address this bottom part of this pyramid or this cone or whatever this is. But then past that, you know, there is research that shows, you know, universal basic income, all these like kind of handouts, they don't really do anything unless there is a pathway towards upward mobility, unless there's a pathway towards creating community resilience, right? So the first step is about, we want to help build people's abilities to maintain their personal stability and security. The second step is really about their personal and social networks. Now that I'm stable, I can reach out to my neighbors and we can start, you know, collaborating. We can start helping each other, right? Because when I'm stable enough, I can help other people that are not as stable. And once a community starts becoming stabilized, then they are ready to take risks and start taking liabilities. So this is where something like microfinance can come in, where people are actually willing to take loans and take liabilities, until finally they can actually achieve self-agency. So to follow along all these are actually DeFis that are either already developed or that we're in the middle of developing ourselves or have been developed by a different blockchain company or whomever. That actually covers an entire gamut of social development and social finance kinds of needs out there. Anywhere from civic finance, where it's about like a singular, very large transaction that needs to be monitored, towards more like, things that are very high volume in transactions, but very low in value. They can be like P2P trade, they can be microfinance, they can be these direct cash transfers, et cetera. There are projects that we've been doing for community debt, micro social impact bonds, et cetera. In our other projects, you can check our blogs about that. And how can we service from the long tail, right? The long tail of social development needs, because this is the very, very last mile. There's going to be a lot of kinds of things that we here, like I'm in the United States, that we don't design for financially, but in developing communities, maybe we can develop something for them. So essentially, this is what we're trying to do. We are building the bottom of the pyramid in this project for Ubiquity, and then from there, we hope that we can have some kind of progressive ladder that they can climb. One thing that Ian keeps talking to us about is how hope is actually something that's very important. If you can't give them hope, then what can you give them, right? And so we want to give them more than just cash. We want to give them hope. We want to give them a clear pathway, or not a clear pathway, but just a pathway towards overcoming all this poverty and instability. And that's actually the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. I think we'll just leave. There's only 20 minutes left in this talk. And I think there's only 2 of you in the audience, and I already know one of you, James. So perhaps we can have a little discussion here. Maybe if there's any questions so far. Or maybe I can just start off by asking Edward to just start chatting a little bit more about the actual situation in Myanmar. And I think one thing that I want to ask you, Edward, is, given that the banking system it's imploding, it's collapsing, what are some of the things that you've been hearing about people trying to bring aid over? What are the considerations right now?
Right. Well, the way I look at the situation, and also things that I've been hearing from my friends, is that, well, on one hand, you have the local currency, the Myanmar kyat, keep on depreciating, and there's no supply of foreign currency. So as someone with a lot of Myanmar kyat holding your cash in Myanmar, you're the lucky ones. You have the cash, but also every day you're seeing your cash depreciating. There's no way for you to buy any foreign currency in Myanmar. So for these people, and for many company owners, they want to get their currency out, and they want to convert their currency, Myanmar currency, into US dollar for stability as well. So I know that some foreign foundations, they have been trying to use these kind of situations to basically wire their money in and help this company to get their money out. So I've heard stories about some Singaporean companies helping out some US foundations to basically cash out so that they can get their Myanmar currency back to their Singapore bank account, while the US aid foundations can give out the cash in Myanmar without going through the Myanmar banks. So everyone wins. But of course, that's not the best arrangement, especially for the charity and also for the development sector. So that's one thing. The other thing is the Myanmar military government they're also very aware of the international support of to the protester. So no matter from Myanmar people overseas or from their friends, many people are actually supporting the CDM movement by donating through various channels, mostly personal channels, into the countries to support the people, the civil servants who are supporting the civil disobedience. The Myanmar military government is very much aware of that. So they're also hypersensitive of these incoming fund, no matter it's for humanitarian purpose or they actually fund that support the CPM. So that's the additional sensitivity part as well.
So do you think we have to be like even more careful about how we move money, so that we're not retaliated against, by the government or by bad actors?
Yeah, we actually had a pretty interesting chat with a teacher friend from Myanmar. He was saying the National League for Democracy, they have done similar projects in the past, essentially providing a monthly subsidies to parents to keep their kids at school. So we have to be extra careful so that our program doesn't look too similar to that program.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think Vaughn, do you have a question?
Hello.
Hello.
Can you see me?
Yes, great. Thank you for joining.
All right. It's a small group here, so I'll just give a quick introduction.
Great.
So I'm a tech entrepreneur. I'm from Australia, but I'm currently in Yangon. We've been doing kind of HR tech, and currently we're helping people with cross-border payroll, so actually paying workers, making sure workers can get cash in the country.
Great.
So that's what we do. And I guess the question is more focused on early on during the coup, the military released, saying, look, we're going to outlaw cryptocurrencies. That's a thing, right? So is that like if we wanted to do cryptocurrencies here, it would be more like, it's like drugs, to buy and sell and cash out, you have to go underground to do that here. So how are you guys kind of tackling with this kind of issue?
Great. Yeah. So we decided, cryptocurrencies is going to be something we're going to try to hold off on, specifically for that reason, but also because it might not be a very good cash transfer mechanism. What we might do is we might do something more with the vouchers, which is not a cryptocurrency itself. It's using blockchain as a store of value, but not as a currency. It's more like a promise of something else, right? And it can be worth money, but it is not a currency. And the other way that we're using blockchain is actually about data management. So if you're not familiar with IDCC, IDCC and ICSO, it's really about impact data management. So sending signals so that people like philanthropers or impact investors actually know where the money's going. So, and that's important for us because we need to be able to collect the data for the RCT project itself. So that's kind of like the different dimensions of how we're using blockchain. And I just want to make sure, that there's blockchain and then cryptocurrency is a type of blockchain, right? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yep. So I understand you use vouchers that can cash out, not cash out, but get goods and services. One project overseas was in Venezuela, where they used the blockchain to pay doctors in the medical area, and they were taking funds from like the US, and they needed people in Venezuela to register for this program to make sure that they're qualified to do this. You also have a kind of registration vetting process in your model. How are you going to protect or prove that these goods and services are not being used by people in the CDM? Or how are you going to protect the privacy and data if you need to?
Well, right now we're actually trying to make it really simple. So for instance, whatever the mechanism that we decide to go with, because we haven't decided to go with anything yet, but the consideration is we need to give this to the family, and then how the family uses it, we can either go one of two ways. One is hopefully we can give them real cash and then they can spend it, and then we don't care about how it's being spent. They just spend it, right? The other way is that we actually have to create partnerships with all these kinds of market for poverty partners. And then we have to design it, right? Books, this, that, and the other. Now, who's buying it and all this kind of stuff? There are ways that you can actually protect what is actually being tracked, right? And who's being tracked. There's this thing called a zero knowledge proof that allows you to know that all these facts behind who you are and where you are all exist. I don't need to know it. I just need to know that you qualify, and that it's going to set up a mathematical equation that shows that indeed you are this kind of person, and then you can spend this kind of money. So those kinds of things you can that kind of privacy you can build into the system. But in terms of like, what are they going to use it for? Can they exploit it for, you know, buying weapons or buying contraband? You know, that we can't control as much, because there's always the possibility and probability that all these stores of value will be used in a secondary market, right? These secondary markets can be gray markets, they can be black markets, and that is something that is very hard for us to control. Our primary interest is making sure that the children get something, and then what happens after that, you know, we can design, you know, that those vouchers, they, you know, they get burnt, whatever it might be, so that it's just a very one-to-one kind of closed circuit relationship. Or if it's something that's more like a community currency, it'll just keep going and going and going and going and going. But there are ways to build in controls, but then it becomes less of a decentralized system, becomes more of a permissioned system. Yeah, so
Yeah,
it's kind of open right now.
I guess the situation is more about, you guys have a KYC process, and how do you make sure that the military does not get access to that, or is it possible to do that?
Right. So again, because we're starting with schools, the KYC process is very low. It's going to be, you know, we are going to be working with schools that are, it's called like proof of authority. Basically, that there's going to be somebody that, or it can even be a consensus mechanism that says, yes, these people actually have children of this age that should start receiving this kind of cash. Now, all this kind of like more programmable finance mechanisms, you know, we're going to try to avoid to make this complex as possible. We really want to try to get cash into the hands of these families as much as possible. And where that cash goes after that, you know, hard to say. You know, because that's not part of our vetting process, is to know which flag you wear, right? It's just, do you have kids, right? And that's it.
Yeah.
And past that, you know, and these, like I showed you that pyramid, and we do want to offer different kinds of DeFi solutions. And once we start approaching those, the KYC process needs to be, so what we found is something that we call progressive KYC. KYC in the developed world works very systematically. There's a very clear set of rules for how you approach KYC, but in the developing world, you might not even have the right credentials. You might not have a driver's license, a passport. You might not have a bank account. You might not have a lot of different things that can prove all these kinds of things, but your community members may be able to vouch for you. And so what we do is we incrementally build this KYC process. We actually borrowed this from the UNIS Foundation, or the Grameen model, which basically has communities vouch for each other, and that incrementally starts to build your credibility. It starts to build your digital track record, which, you know, you can make public or you can hide it, but it's something that when you need to reveal it, you can reveal it, and it is believable. To eventually, we call this progressive KYC because we eventually progressively want to step them up and up and up until they can just apply for a regular loan for a car or for a house, right? But they might be too poor to ever even know or have the business acumen or financial literacy to even ever be able to do that. So that's our process. I think for like really typical blockchains or really typical cryptocurrencies, they have to have a very formal KYC process, because these are very international monies that they're fungible tokens. They're gold, right? They're digital gold. And for that kind of thing, you know, we're not doing that yet. we're trying to stay at a very local level to solve very localized problems. Yeah, so we have a different process for that. Does that answer your question? Great.
Yes, yes, thank you.
Cool, cool.
Right. Hello, James.
Sorry.
A question. I have a question. Chris mentioned that fractional reserve as a kind of smart philanthropy was practiced by Red Cross in Africa.
Oh, that's right.
My
Yes.
question is that to Edward, whether you think that such kind of fractional reserve smart philosophy is applicable in Myanmar.
I think ultimately that's just credit creation in a way. I mean, right now we're still exploring the problems that we're trying to tackle. So we're still reviewing different solutions that are available out there. And the thing is, with Myanmar, the situation is changing on a daily basis. So at this stage, we're trying to keep our nets as wide as possible. Yeah.
I have a response to that, James. Thanks for asking. I mean, essentially, that's more about this level, which is when they're when they're getting ready to actually start taking credit and taking risk and liability. Right now, you know, we're really just in this area, which is about helping them to become more stable. So that's kind of where we are right now. I was just giving the fractional reserve as one of the potential uses for blockchain and cryptocurrency that we're considering. But you know, I wanted to raise it because it's a very interesting project, and potentially anybody in the audience might think of an innovative way to start dealing with this. And in fact, I mean, in Africa, he is using it. Will Ruddock is the founder. He is using it to help maintain stability. But I think you know, we just have to research a little bit more.
Can I also ask a question? I think there are actually a lot of discussion about the last mile, which is really about like how the cash can be spent, how the cash can be delivered, the KYC, the CIC, like the inclusions currency. So basically, what I actually want to spend the last 2 minutes talk about the first mile, which is like, you know, the artwork and the NFT plus the philanthropy. What do you guys think about like the combination of those three things for this project, particularly in terms of fundraising strategy?
Actually, that's something that Ed and I were just talking about a few days ago, and he gave me the green light. Ed, do you want to talk about your green light? Why you like it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, ultimately we're trying to raise fund, and I work in the art market, so I definitely hear lots of things, and many of my arts world friend has been asking me, why aren't we doing NFT now? There are lots of speculation, of course, but there's also a lot of possibility for established artists to kind of create a new model of philanthropy. And it's a pretty interesting idea to connect NFT with UBI, in the sense that one thing we are trying to, on the NFT side, we're trying to lock the authenticity, the ownership, the provenance of a particular artworks. It can be a digital artworks, or we're just locking the certificate of authenticity in that token. But on the other hand, we are also using the same technology to kind of record all this impact that we generate through the donations. So it will be a pretty interesting way to kind of complete the circle. Yeah, to tie everything together. But that's something we're still exploring. Yeah.
Right, and just I want to add a little bit more about the NFT. NFTs are interesting because the provenance means that it can actually pay back everybody that's touched this work. So, for instance, there's the artist that made it; they can get their cut. There's the handlers; they can get their cut. There is the charity, and they will get their cut. And so this is sold, right? It is sold, it's auctioned. And all the monies go to everybody, and it's all automated. But what's really interesting is that there's a secondary market, and then the owner of that NFT can sell it for 10 times more value, but still the artists and the charity and all these people that have their finger into this NFT will also get paid whatever royalties are, and it'll keep going and going and going. And so I think it'll be a really interesting way, to create a compounding value for a collectible, because someone is willing to pay, like, what do they pay? They paid $68 million for a digital work by Beeple, right? Just like, could we just have 1% of that go towards charity? Like that. Can we have just built that in? So we would like to have the next Beeple sale and have like 50% of that go to charity, and who knows? So the rest goes to Beeple, right? Because he deserves it. Okay. I think we're at the time of our meeting. Vaughn, thank you for joining. James, thank you for joining. Tat, thanks for hosting. Edward, of course, thank you for being our partner in this.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, please be in touch, Vaughn. You can find us on that website. One thing about that website, this I have to mention. Ubiquity.Foundation isn't linked to the site yet. I just launched it like a few hours ago. So it's going to be like 24, 48 hours until this URL is actually live. But if you scan this QR code, you can get to the site. Also, if you just go to Shanghai City or Connecting Myanmar, find any of us. If you are interested in collaborating with us, or if you have any ideas for what we've been talking about, we would love to stay connected. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks for that. Also, if you need anything from the ground in Myanmar as well, I'm here in the tech space. So happy
Fantastic.
to get in touch.
Yes, please. Thank you so much. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.